If you're a Desi, then you know I'm talking about dowry. But if you're not a brown person with an Indian lineage, then you probably don't know what dowry is and how is it connected to selling people. Dowry is an age-old tradition which was a common practice among the British royals. It is a payment in the form of money or property that a bride brings to her husband's home. In societies where marriages were between very young couples, it helped them to start their lives. And in some societies, dowry served as a support for when a husband dies. But you see, in India, before the British invaded the country, any land or property was divided equally or at least appropriately among the children of the possessor. However, during the British rule, a law denying a girl child of a right to her parents' property was imposed. So, the property was then given to the son-in-law instead by the commoners. Eventually, after the independence, dowry somehow became a form of wealth acquisition for the groom's family, demanding 100 grams or 1 kilo of gold and millions in cash along with four-wheeler became a common practice. And without the transaction, they would refuse to proceed with the wedding. I see these days how people go to the US to pursue a master's degree, and once they become a well-paid software engineer or a doctor, they live like a poor few. And on asking why, they respond saying, "I'm saving all the money for my sister's wedding to pay as dowry." And then they say, "Don't worry, I may be living like a mouse right now, but when I get married, I'm going to get paid double the price in dowry because I'm a software engineer or a doctor." So if you have plans of an arranged marriage with a software engineer or a doctor from India or living in the US, don't you think it's going to be really expensive? Do you think you can afford him? The demand for dowry keeps increasing as the wedding dates near and pop up again after they tie the knot. The bride's family quietly comply, fearing for their daughters' lives. Yep, fearing for their daughters' lives. One of the major reasons for domestic violence in India is dowry. The Indian National Crime Bureau showed that for every 90 minutes, a woman dies because of dowry. It is so alarming that at one point, female feticide became an epidemic in India, which is why they do not have gender reveal parties. Attempting to identify the gender of the fetus is against the Indian laws, and all for good reasons. Parents fearing the birth of a girl child and possible death in the future because of her marriage dumped the children in the dumpster. Over 750,000 were aborted each year, according to the United Nations. Weddings are a passion in India, but unfortunately, so is dowry, even though it is against the law. The Dowry Prohibition Act was passed in the year 1961, and yet we see it being practiced till date. How is that? Well, to call the transaction a crime, it needs to first be proven that it was indeed a demand for dowry and not a gift that the bride's family intend to give the bride herself or to the groom's family. Therefore, in the name of gifts, the tradition continues to plague the nation till date. The harassment and the violence that comes with it is worse. I remember being 8 or 9 years old. It was 7:30 p.m. and my parents weren't home yet from work. I heard a knock on the door and it was my housemaid, drenched in sweat and blood all over her face. Her clothes were half torn and she was gasping for air as she spoke. Asked me if my parents were home, and I told her they weren't yet. She asked me for a meager amount of her salary in advance. Unfortunately, I did not have the cash with me. On hearing that, she broke down crying. Told me, an 8-year-old, that her husband beat her and also his family because she couldn't bring home the dowry they asked. I just stood there in a state of shock. A lot of people assume that all this happens only in the rural parts of India, not in the urban parts, because more and more urban population is beginning to refuse dowry. Both those assumptions are unfounded. Just because you do not hear about it or seen a case around you does not mean the problem doesn't exist. I'll put the link down in the description box below of an episode from Satyameva Jayate. Do check it out. I remember spending my 11 a.m. Sunday mornings as a teenager watching this series without missing a single episode. Hands down the best thing that happened to the Indian television till date. Now, if you think this problem of dowry is only harming the daughters of India, you could not be more wrong. The Indian Penal Code has section 498A that deals with abuse due to dowry demands. Here's what it says. Now I want you to pay attention to the verbiage here. Whoever, being the husband or relative of the husband of a woman, subjects such woman to cruelty shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years and shall also be liable to fine. Here the explanation for cruelty is that any willful conduct which is of such a nature as is likely to drive the woman to commit suicide or to cause grave injury or danger to life, limb or health, whether mental or physical, of the woman. Or harassment of the woman where such harassment is with a view to coercing her or any person related to her to meet any unlawful demand for any property or valuable security, or is on an account of failure by her or any person related to her to meet such demand. Now, before I dig deeper into the verbiage of this law, let me mention that on an account of an offense of this law, the perpetrator can be arrested without a warrant, which means that the arrest can happen immediately after the FIR is filed and the investigation can happen later. Secondly, the perpetrator cannot be released on bail by anyone except for the court. Thirdly, once the charges are filed, they cannot be withdrawn. If you've already begun seeing where this is going, you probably know what's to come next. If you haven't figured it out, let me show you how morbidly abused can this law get. Now you see, the word relative here is not well defined. So as the law suggests, everyone in the household is arrested after the FIR is filed, instantaneously, meaning nobody is spared. Not the 8-day-old baby, not the 7-month pregnant lady, nor the 75-plus-year-old wheelchair-bound senior citizen in the house. Nobody. What's worse is that because the arrest happens first and the investigation later, the arrest takes place on a mere word of mouth of the victim, irrespective of whether or not she's lying. Her accusations are in itself considered as evidences of the crime. Women have openly come out telling their lawyers that they have filed the case to threaten the man or to pressure him into agreeing to her terms. There have been voice recordings of women as well, just like in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard's case, where the woman is asking for an expensive perfume from her husband because it's his responsibility to keep her happy because he vowed to do so. And if he fails to comply to it, she's going to file a 498A case on him. 498A case. It's a dowry abuse case against a man who refused to buy her an expensive perfume. If you think I'm making this all up, go check the link down in the description box below. It's got Martyrs of Marriage. They've depicted the horrors of 498A in much more detail than I have. When you watch the documentary, you will find that there's one sentence that keeps repeating during the victims' interviews. They say, such terms were not agreed upon before the wedding. If you haven't watched my video on why don't Indian men want to marry women with jobs, go give it a watch. In it, I mentioned that couples in India are generally not allowed to speak to one another before the wedding. You see, here's where the problem lies. You do not know what you're getting into when it's an arranged marriage. Parents often always check the background of the family and never really get to know the person they're getting their children married to. My friend is a very good example of this, She was a team lead at a Big 7 firm, married off to a man living in Gulf country. Arranged marriage. He kept assaulting her and only touched her to cause her harm. On confrontation, he told her that he was in love with someone that he wanted to get married to. But his parents refused to accept it and tied off to her. So if I cannot be happy, I'm not letting you be happy either, is what he said. 6 months of abuse, and he finally confided in her. He told her that he's gay. The person he was in love with was a man. Now this is a story from before same-sex relationships became legal in India. Let the couple get to know one another before the wedding. Please. Asking for dowry is against the law, and yet you will find families engaging in such transactions, knowing fully that they are committing a crime. I understand their point of view because the society works in a certain way. They believe that if I do not engage in such transactions as dowry related acts, my daughter might remain unwed for life. But isn't it the same as paying bribes to your traffic policeman to get away from your helmet related or insurance related issues and then getting back home and yelling at the policemen and their public sector workers because they work on bribery? You are doing the very same thing you swore to destroy. Refuse dowry demands even if they come at a later stage of the wedding. Everyone in the wedding hall knows that it is against the law to ask for dowry. So raise your voice, at least as a bride whose parents are being conned. People will call the wrong person to be at fault, not you. Why are you worried about an hour long of embarrassment when you know if you pay heed to these dowry demands, you will be facing something worse than an embarrassment for your lifetime? आग में घी नहीं, पानी डालो. You are being overpowered because you're allowing the other person to overpower you. This idiocy is also seen in the recent Netflix movie called Darlings. Now, irrespective of how the movie turned out to be, there's a lot to learn from this movie. Possible spoilers ahead. Now, in this movie, the protagonist is assaulted by her husband repeatedly, and yet she refuses to complain about it before the authorities. Now, I understand that it is because she is made to believe, just like many women in India, that she is being harmed because it is a way of her husband showing his love towards her. That's when the police officer says she is being tortured because she's allowing him to torture her. Now, talking about section 498A, instead of it being scrapped altogether, it must be amended. And first of all, it should be made incognizable and compoundable. It must not be based off of a victim's word of mouth and instead be based on evidence, just like how Dowry Prohibition Act is. Now, of course, to provide immediate help to these women, they must be and mandatorily be taken to shelter homes and provide therapy. This way, you're even providing employment opportunities to therapists and psychologists under the public sector domain. Don't just arrest the perpetrators and leave the victims out in the cold. A mentally unwell person would not always know that they need help, so mandating this part and talking to a therapist would not only raise a possibility of the truth coming out in case of false allegations, but also provide genuinely scarred women with some mental help. It will also help straighten up women who are dropping false allegations just because their perfumes were not delivered on time. Indian Karens. Krina. Basically, why are you picking up the entire clan off of the house and leaving the victim there all by herself in the place where she was abused? She should be taken out of there and left among people who are trained to provide the right kind of support, which, by the way, her parents will also not be able to provide because they've never dealt with an abused daughter before. So all in all, men, choose your women wisely and quit asking for dowry. You're not a cleaning brush to be taken home at a bargain price. Raise your standards. And women, all those resources and your parents' money that went into educating you was not for you to act like a trash can. Quit being full of garbage and stop falsely accusing innocent people. And India, you have educated manpower and training institutions already in place. Utilize them. And to all of you, a very happy Independence Day.